Maria, did you want to go ahead and maybe
Well,
just
sure.
start with some introductions?
Oh my gosh, I would be honored to make some introductions.
Uh,
I'm Dr. Maria Rago. I'm the president of ANAD, and I want to welcome everybody. This is a really special night, and I'm so glad to be here. Um, John Schu is now a famous author,
Yay.
and so we're so grateful that he came to spend some time with us. Maybe you're going to share some things about your journey, John. I knew you were a traveling librarian
Yes.
before you wrote this, because you wrote this in 2024, right?
Yeah, it came out in 2024, and I started writing it in 2021.
Wow, wow. So, I mean, it's already a New York Times bestseller and
Yay.
has so many accolades. And so, thank you for being here.
Oh,
And
thank you.
you guys might know Jason. Jason, you might want to give an introduction.
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Jason Wood, the Director of Community Engagement here at ANID. I joined the organization about 2 years ago. Back in 2020, I was diagnosed with an eating disorder, and I was mad. I was mad that I had battled in silence for so long. So I wanted to get out there and start sharing my story, and I ended up publishing my book, Starving for Survival, and one thing led to another, and I found myself here at ANID where, yeah, Maria's doing a little promo for that right now. And I found myself here at ANID where, to me, one of the best parts about the organization and about my role is to just be able to tell stories and to talk about the human behind the eating disorder, because I think we so often end up talking about just eating disorders that we forget about the human aspect of everything. So I always love that our stories can illustrate what it's really like and serve as connection. So I'm looking forward to this conversation tonight.
I am too, and I love that you use the word connection. I was in a third grade classroom 2 days ago, and I did pop-in Q&As for 5 minutes in each classroom. And in one of the third grade classrooms, the teacher asked me to give writing advice. And I wrote three words on the board, which were connect, connection, and capacious. And those three things are always on my mind in all the work that I do. So thank you for using one of my favorite words, Jason.
I love connection and community. It's like those two are my go-to words.
And
I,
John, before you take it away, I just
yep.
wanted to make one comment. I feel like the reason we're all together tonight is, John, you were once in a position maybe that you didn't know what if it was going to be okay. You didn't know how things were going to be. And
Yeah.
now here you are enlightening so many people. And I feel like, it's such a gift to the people that are able to watch the video tonight to know that they can be able to do that in the
Yeah,
future.
yeah. And it's because of people like you, Dr. Maria Rego, who help us, right? Who help us get unstuck and help us move out of feeling like we're trapped forever out into the light. So we'll talk more about that later because I've known Maria Rego since the 1990s. So I'll go ahead and start. I'm going to do a mini presentation just to tell you a little bit about my background and how I came to write Louder Than Hunger. So I'm John Schu, and I live in Naperville, Illinois, which is just outside of Chicago. And my full-time job is doing school visits. And I always tell students that during our time together, I'm going to be wearing a lot of hats. Not literally, but I'm going to be wearing hats like one that is filled with optimism. And I always tell them that I'm an adult who leads with optimism, an adult that leads with joy. And that is really surprising for me to say because when I was a teenager, I was not very optimistic. And when I was a teenager, I was not very joyful. And I never thought that life would get better, but it indeed did. I tell them next, I'm always going to be wearing the hat of a teacher. All of my degrees are in education. I started off as a middle school English teacher in Seoul, South Korea. And then I was a second grade teacher. And then I was a third grade teacher for 3 years. And then I was a fourth grade teacher for 1 year. And I used all of those experiences to write a picture book called This is a School, which has words by me and illustrations by Veronica Miller Jameson. And my favorite part of all of my picture books is this. When you take off the dust jacket, there is a surprise, and the surprise is a poster. And on this poster, it says happy, happy reading. And all of the students are in my favorite room of every school, which is the library. And the library should be the heart of the campus. I then went to library school and I became the school librarian in the school where I had been a third and fourth grade teacher. And I loved every single day as a school librarian because every day we would celebrate books and we would connect with books and we would cheer for books. And I used all of those experiences as a school librarian to write this book called This Is a Story. And again, I have a poster. And when you take off the dust jacket, you see that poster. And it again says happy, happy reading. And what I love about this book is that there are 44 real children's books that are featured throughout the art. And when I wrote this as a school and when I wrote this as a story, nobody out there in the world was really surprised because I know a lot about schools and I know a lot about libraries and I know a lot about story. But the hat that I'm always the most comfortable wearing is that of a reader. And I want to share a book that I think pairs really well with my book, Louder Than Hunger, which is the main focus of our time together tonight. This book is called Big, and it's about reclaiming, it's about how reclaiming the way that we use the word big, and that so often the word big is weaponized, and so often the word big doesn't feel good to our souls in the way that it's used. This book has a really, doesn't have a poster, but it has a really, really cool case cover. And on the case cover are words like creative and bold and honest and sweet and compassionate. And this is how the story goes. Once there was a girl with a big laugh and a big heart and very big dreams. And on her shirt it says, Dream Big. She learned her ABCs and one, two, threes. She always said please and thank you, and even put away all her toys. At dinner, she ate all her food. What a big girl you are, the adults would say. And it was good. And the way the word big is being used feels good to her heart. It feels good to her soul. She grew and learned and laughed and dreamed and grew and grew and grew. And it was good. And you see some of those words from the case cover, like caring and considerate and creative and smart, until it wasn't. And we can see the way the shopkeeper is glaring at her. And she's on Santa Claus's lap, and he says, You're a big girl, aren't you? And the way that word is being used no longer feels so great. And we can feel the feelings of that girl in that second grade line. And then one day, something happened. Something happened at recess. And as you can see, she gets stuck in the swing. And instead of people helping her, they belittle her. And she feels very, very small. And someone who should help her makes her feel even like worse and makes her feel bigger in that moment. And from this book, I think there are so many important conversations that we can have with children, with ourselves, about how we use that word. So that's me as reader. I did not write that book, but I love that book with the whole of myself. And now I'm going to talk about myself as a writer. I was a dormant writer for a long time. I was a reluctant writer for a long time, but people kept telling me I was a writer, and eventually I believed them. So I wrote a book called The Gift of Story, which is about the affective side of the reading life. And the reason I want to talk about this book is because I don't think Louder Than Hunger would exist without this book. I learned so much about psychology of story, and I learned so much about what stories do for our hearts, what stories do for our lives by writing this book. And in order to write this book, I interviewed hundreds of people. And I asked all of them to finish the sentence starter, story is dot, dot, dot. And I realized that right away that we all define story differently, that the way I define story might be different from how Jason defines story. And the way that Jason defines story is probably different from how Maria defines story, that the way that we look at story and view story is really, really unique. But this is what I came up with. And if I were with 100 or 500 students right now, this is what I'd say. I'd say, I want you to read the repeated word, which is story. So here we go. reading, but I'll read it since I don't have students here with me. So, reading stories and writing stories and sharing stories can help us heal. And when I'm working with middle school students and high school students, this is where I start to open up the suitcase of my heart. This is where I go from wearing like a very, very like, over the top, enthusiastic personality to becoming a bit more serious. And I tell them that when I was in the eighth grade, I went into the hospital and I spent a lot of time in the hospital over the next 2 years. And I start to open up to them in this moment about how one of the reasons I was hospitalized was for something called obsessive compulsive disorder or OCD. And then I, in that moment, sometimes talk about anxiety and sometimes talk about depression. But this is always a springboard for me to start talking about those topics. And then I tell them that they can inspire us and that stories can help us clarify things about ourselves, that stories can help us clarify things about others, that stories can help us become more compassionate. And most importantly, as we talked about in the beginning, that stories connect us, right? That stories connect us to something bigger than ourselves. And when I wrote this book, I think that I put a lot of like wisdom into this book that hopefully helps people. And I always say to people, if you decide not to read the book, I'm going to tell you what I think is the most important passage in my book, the one that I always make sure people highlight if they read with a highlighter. And it's this passage right here, which is that books can be the perfect prescriptions to let us know that we're going to be okay. And that is what was my guide as I wrote Louder Than Hunger, because I was very worried, Maria. I was very, very, very worried to write Louder Than Hunger. Because when I think about my own experiences with books about disordered eating, about anorexia nervosa, about bulimia, they were all really, really negative, and
Mhm.
they were all toxic to my heart, and they were really, really bad for me. And I talked to kids about how I vividly remember going to the Tinley Park Public Library and finding an isolated library carrel and putting words like anorexia into the library catalog and bulimia. And it led me to things that I won't talk about because they were bad for me. And they
Mhm.
really taught me how to have a better eating disorder. And so when it came time to write this book, and Jake Stacy, who's the main character, was demanding that I write this book, I kept saying, how can I do this? How can I write this book and not harm readers? Well, I remembered that in my book, The Gift of Story, I had written books can be the perfect prescriptions that let us know that we're going to be okay. And so that's what guided me, Maria, that if ever I was going to put something into the book that glorified eating disorders or showed like an eating disorder is something that, you should strive to have, like so many books have done, I hopefully would not have put that, but it was always, always, always my guide. Does that make sense, Maria?
What a beautiful
Yeah.
way that you
Yeah.
put your values into this and you let that guide you, and that you also, I imagine people that may be watching this, I see the pain in their eyes. I
Yeah.
imagine that they are worried about their future or fearful about getting better or scared to face the things they're working on. And then to have you come, you're so open-hearted
Yeah.
and the
Oh.
way you share, I feel very happy for people that get to hear your talk tonight. I'm sure you're making a giant impact because of how much you don't want to harm. And thank you
Yeah.
for creating something because I agree, we don't find any resources for people that, or people will be like, well, eating disorders are this, eating disorders are this, and it
Yeah.
gives people new ideas that they don't need.
Yeah. Yeah. My screen went away, Jason. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, sorry about that. I had to reclaim the host really quick because we had some more people
Oh
come.
yeah, I saw people were, and I didn't know. Like
Oh
there,
yeah,
yeah,
no worries. So I
yeah.
think we had some
I
more people join us, but I just
yeah, yeah. There are
connected
some in
back
the
again.
waiting
So
room.
sorry about
Sorry.
that.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I'll stop talking for a moment. But yeah, I kept seeing people come in, and I saw that I mean, I saw them in the waiting room, but you weren't admitting them, and now I realize why.
Yeah, yeah, I wasn't letting
Sorry,
it.
everyone.
Hello, everybody.
So should I pause for another moment, Jason, or can I share again?
No, it's all yours
Oh,
again.
oh, okay, right. Let's see. Is it back? Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about writing louder than we'll start talking about writing louder than hunger, and then we'll do the Q&A with Dr. Rago and myself. So I love telling kids this. I write all of my books, if possible, at 46 and Broadway in New York City, and that's super, super specific. But the reason I love writing at that intersection is because there's really good energy. And when I'm outside, I'm surrounded by Broadway theaters. And I always tell kids that if I make my writing deadline for the day, that means I get to see a Broadway show. So it's really, really, really encouraging. And I love that in the Marriott Marquis, which is where I write all of my books, is not a commercial for the Marriott Marquis, there is a John Schu shelf that is dedicated to my books. And I
Oh.
love that when I enter the hotel, they often say, "Welcome home, Mr. Schu. This must mean that you are here to write." And they hold me accountable. And I always tell kids that I love that when I look outside of the hotel in New York City, there's love and there's light that I feel. And I always go over to my desk and I pick up my notebook. I write all of my books in notebooks. I don't write on the computer until I know the entire story. And this is what I always do to prepare my heart to write. I always walk to the Bethesda Fountain, which is in Central Park, and I spent so much time with the Bethesda Fountain when I was writing Louder Than Hunger that I created a character named Frieden, and Frieden is based on Bethesda. And I can always tell when this image comes up and kids have read the book, they gasp and they say, "That's Frieden." And I say, "Well, that's Bethesda." But I base the fountain on her. There are people in the waiting room. Should I admit, Jason?
Yeah, yeah, go ahead
Sorry,
and admit.
sorry,
Yep.
sorry. I don't want to mess up. And then I always tell them that as I'm walking to the Bethesda Fountain, I'm always thinking about my favorite author, Kate Camillo, and I'm always thinking about her book, The Tiger Rising. And I'm thinking about how the main character in this book, his name is Rob. He's very, very sad because his mom has recently passed away, and they've just moved to a new town. And they don't have a lot of money, and they're living in a motel. And his father is like a turtle in his shell. And Rob keeps all of his feelings and he keeps all of his emotions inside of himself. And then he puts a tiger on top of the suitcase of his heart. And I always tell myself when I'm writing, "John, you must open up the suitcase of your heart." And when I'm working with students, I always tell them, "You must open up the suitcase of your heart by finding somebody who you can trust to share those big feelings with." Louder Than Hunger has an amazing audiobook that's read by Jeff Ebner. And then I also read on the audiobook. I read the dedications and I read my author's note. So I'm going to read the dedications to Louder Than Hunger. For Grandma Ruth, who always reminded me to slow down. My grandma was my everything. My grandma is a main character in my book, Louder Than Hunger. My grandma always wore red. My grandma loved coupons. And I loved that every Saturday, here's me in 1986, that every Saturday my grandma and I would go to the grocery store. And once a month, this is a very 1980s thing, you could get a new book in the Walt Disney Fun to Read collection at the grocery store. And my favorite book in that collection is called Goofy's Big Race. And I still have the copy that my grandma bought me in 1986. And it has my grandma's handwriting in it. And it says Johnny Schumacher, September 1986. And this book plays a big role in my book, Louder Than Hunger, because there's a refrain in this book that I use in Louder Than Hunger, which is slow and steady, steady and slow. That's the way we always go. And over the past 2 weeks, as I talk about a book that came out 2 weeks ago that I wrote called Ruthie Rose's Big Idea, which is all about poetry, I've connected that poetry's always helped my anxiety, Maria. That when I was a child, I would memorize poems from A Light in the Attic, and I would memorize poems from Where the Sidewalk Ends. And when I was feeling anxious at night, I would just recite those poems and they would comfort me and they would calm me. And it took talking about this book to realize that, oh, well, yeah, I've always done that. I've always memorized refrains to help my anxiety. And then the book is dedicated to Molly O'Neill, who's my agent, who said, there's a story here, keep writing. And in my book, This is a School, I wrote this stanza from my agent, which is, some people see what we're good at, and that helps us know it too. And Maria Rago, I'll say, we've not said this yet, Maria Rago was my psychologist in the 90s, and she saw so much in me that I did not see in myself. And it's such an honor to be reunited with her, like, what is it, like 29 years later? And then it's dedicated to every teenager who imagines performing on Broadway one day. And yesterday I got to spend time with like 100 theater kids, and this book really resonates with theater kids. And then most importantly, for 13-year-old me who needed a book like this one, I wrote a book that I needed at the Tinley Park Public Library when I was clarifying, do I indeed have an eating disorder? I needed a book that wasn't going to teach me to be better at my disorder or to motivate me to be better at my disorder. And the last thing that I want to read is the book opens with a foreword, and it's an honor to always share this with middle school students and high school students. Dear reader, what if someone was brave enough to tell you the truth? What if someone dared to reveal their heart to you? The book that you hold in your hands tells a painful truth. It reveals a beautiful broken heart, Jake's heart. And this is where I always pause with students and say, I'm not Jake. They always want to call me Jake. A lot of kids will say, hi, Jake. And I'll say, that's not my name. My name is John. But I say, what does Jake and I have in common? Well, both of our names start with J. My last name is Schu. His last name is Stacy. What do we have in common? Both of our last names start with S, which means that Jake, Stacy, and I have the same initials. But when it came time to write this book, I didn't want to write a memoir, Maria, really, because I wanted to protect some people in my own story, in my own life. And I wanted a little bit of distance from myself. And when I was a child, I really wished my name were Jake. And when I was a child, my favorite imaginary student was Mike Stacy. And so I put the two together. Jake is 13 years old and he has an eating disorder. You and Jake are about to go on a harrowing journey together. By the time you finish reading this book, you will be friends. Reading Jake's story will change you. You might find that you want to reveal your heart, tell someone your truth. Telling your story can save your life. And in this moment of that line, I see so many kids start crying. And I always have them repeat this one more time. And in this moment, I often bring up the guidance counselor if they feel like a safe person and talk about how that person can help you if you're struggling in this moment. It may save someone else's life too. Jake knows this. John Schu knows this. This is why he wrote this book. For you, your friend Kate DiCamillo. And Kate DiCamillo is the author of The Tiger Rising, the book that helped me open up the suitcase of my heart to become vulnerable enough to tell this story that I hope helps so many people who are struggling. And I'm going to stop there so Maria can interview me. I could go on and on and on.
Well, that's what I mean. I don't have to say a word,
No,
but
you can. But
I
I want to show them, Maria. This book also has a poster, but it does not say happy, happy reading. It says our poetry place.
okay, well, that does make me ask one question to start with, John, because thank you for your beautiful introduction for
Oh no, thank
everyone.
you. Oh, thanks. Sorry, it
So,
was a very long
no, it's
introduction.
perfect. When I started reading Louder Than Hunger, I uh, it's in prose.
Yeah, yeah. It's a no, it's called a
How
no, it's
can
called a,
you eat? How can
it's
you even write in prose?
well, it's called a
That's
no. No,
amazing.
well, it's called a novel in verse. It's called a novel in verse, and it has lots of white space. And often when I show this book to middle schoolers, or you can see their eyes go really wide, and they go, "Oh, that is a really, really big book. Like that is intimidating. That is too big for me." And then I show them that it's a novel in verse, which means it's a series of poems. Like each individual poem is its own story. You could move some of the poems around, and the story could make sense still. But is what I always tell students who say that to me is I wrote this book for brains like mine and a brain like mine and a brain like yours because I gave you lots of white space to breathe. And so many kids write me letters saying that this is the first book in years that they have finished independently. And they all talk about how the white space helped them. And most of the kids who write me have anxiety disorders. And they tell me how the white space helped their anxiety and how it allowed them to breathe. And that's how I wrote the book. I started writing this book the day after I finished revising my book, The Gift of Story. And I wrote it in the Marriott Marquis. And I was on my way home from LaGuardia Airport to Chicago. And I said to myself, I'm never writing another book again because I turned this book in 2 years late. And I should have got a PhD when I finished writing this book because even though I have a degree in library science, I hate research. And so I was feeling like this big weight lifted from my shoulders. And I had just gotten to my seat and I was feeling really good. But then this child started talking to me and he said, my name is Jake, and I write my name over and over and over again. It's calming. And I was like, wait, that's me. That's me. Why is another story talking to me? And very, very quickly, I wrote in my notebook, which doesn't have any lines because it's a sketchbook. I wrote 10 poems, and almost word for word, all of those poems are in the book. And then I just kept going. And like within like 2 months, I'd written 100 poems. And then I shared it with my agent and I said, is this a story? And she said, this is a memoir, but you don't want to write a memoir. So you need to start fictionalizing your life a bit more. But the format of the book, excuse me, that it's in verse, like really, really helped me. And I love writing in verse. And Maria, I get a lot of emails. And if I'm inspired to respond in verse, I know that it was a good email.
That is amazing. I mean, because I
Because
could
it
never.
makes it more fun. I love
Oh,
writing in
I
poetry.
have so much admiration that you could like wing that out there and write that. I
Yeah,
mean, it sounds like there was something really magical about writing that. And it makes me think about people that might be struggling with an eating disorder or depression or anxiety right now who needs that magic because they don't know like what good can ever come from my life. What could I ever do? You know, all I see is all this suffering. And
yeah,
then you're showing how something magical can happen that in a way you don't even control it, right? Like it was there.
yeah,
I don't know. Suffering is something
yeah.
people don't know what to do with, or they like that's not okay and it's not fair. But you're like showing that, you know, sometimes something is building that's going to come out there that's
Yeah.
big, like the other book you mentioned.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, and I'm connecting all this stuff now that I like. It's so interesting, Maria. When I'm presenting, which is what I do every day, it always feels like therapy. And I'll often say to people, like, I am like, this is so great. Like, I'm figuring stuff out here. I'm figuring stuff out as I'm talking to you and I'm making connections. And I really didn't make the connection until Ruthie Rose over the last 2 weeks about how the poetry has always calmed me and has always helped me. So it makes sense that naturally I wanted to write Jake's story in verse because it was really hard to go back to the 90s and relive, having a capital V voice. I talk to kids all the time about how I have a lowercase v and I work every day to keep it a lowercase v voice, but to have to go back into writing a story where a child who's me has that uppercase V again was an interesting thing to do, and to always have people who knew I was writing it to make sure that my mental health was okay.
John, could you expand a little bit about the V,
Oh
the
yeah,
capital V and the small v?
yeah, so Louder Than Hunger takes place in 1996, and so it's historical fiction. And Jake Stacy is in the 8th grade, and his favorite book is The Giver. I'm going to get there, Marie, I promise. His favorite book is The
It's all
Giver.
you.
Yeah, his favorite book is The Giver by Lois Lowry. And I love that when I talk about that book, so many people put their hand on their heart because for them, that's a touchstone book. For them, that's a heart print book. For them, that's a forever book. Jake Stacy loves Sondheim, and he loves Into the Woods, and he loves The Golden Girls, and he loves Family Matters, and he loves spending time with his grandma. And he has a very complicated relationship with food. And in the first act of the book, Jake Stacy, and to me it's 5 acts, Jake Stacy is spiraling out of control because there's this very loud capital V voice that he doesn't actually realize is himself, that is telling him that he's a horrible person, and is telling him that he's a miserable person, and is telling him that he should become invisible, and is helping him slowly disappear from this world. And that capital V voice is an inner saboteur, right? That tries to drive the bus and tries to dictate our lives. And we have to figure out, why is that capital V voice trying to take over my life? And how can I, get into a situation where I can manage it? And in the second act of the book, Jake is hospitalized in a facility called Whispering Pines. And as Maria Rago knows, I spent 7 months in a facility called Linden Oaks in Naperville, Illinois. And I wanted it to sound a little bit like Linden Oaks, but I didn't want Linden Oaks to sue me. And then I wanted it to sound a little bit like Shady Pines from the Golden Girls, to give me a little bit of like comedic relief. So, yeah.
Well, and it was
Did I
really
answer that, Maria?
well, I guess we could talk about that a little bit
Okay.
more,
Yeah.
but I'll go back to it in a
Okay.
second because the Whispering Pines aspect was, I mean, John, it was amazing for me because we could tell the listeners that when you and I reconnected last year, it
Yeah.
was a coincidence
Yeah. Yeah. At
because
Linden Oaks.
yeah, we both got asked to speak at a candlelight vigil at Linden Oaks. And then I had seen like the day before that you were going to be there. And I was like, oh my God, I would love to see John. And then I got to see you and I was like, it was like seeing the Beatles or whatever. Like I was like, ah, because
Oh,
I was so happy to see you. And then you were like, I can't believe I'm back in this building,
yeah.
you know?
Well, and also I hadn't been at Linden Oaks since I was discharged because technically I got kicked out of Linden Oaks. And I talked to kids about that. In the book, Jake is in one facility because it was too hard to have him go to two different places. But Maria, I'm grateful that your team said to me, like, John, you've been here so long, you are not doing the work, you are like manipulating other people. You've gone through like everything that we can do at this time for group therapy, and you have to make the decision that you want help for yourself, right? And it's just so wild to me to think like that I was that way. But yeah, I'm on the other side of that now.
Well, and I guess that's something I was thinking about because, you know, that capital V voice that we were talking about, I mean, that is such a cardinal feature of dealing with, you know, low self-esteem or, you know, depression, that capital V, right? That, or like
Yeah.
especially eating disorders, I think like that voice of like, you cannot have this, or you have to do this compulsive amount of walking, running, whatever it is. And I don't think people think they can ever get rid of the voice or they can ever like not have that voice dictate them. And do you remember anything about how that happened for you that
Like
you were able?
the shift.
Yeah.
Yeah. In Louder Than Hunger, there Jake is hospitalized for a year, and like toward the end of that year, he goes on a day pass, and usually day passes are really awful, and they end in fights, and they end in like stress. And this one particular day pass, I'm going to talk just about myself, but it happens in the book. I got to go with my mom, but in the book I have it my dad, to a bookstore called Unabridged Books. And I remember entering that bookstore and just feeling so much light and so much joy and so much amazing energy and feeling so seen in that space and just like talking to myself in that space and saying like this is a place that you want to be able to go all the time, and this is a neighborhood that you want to be able to go to, and this is a place where you eventually want to live. And I remember then like going on a walk through Lincoln Park in Chicago, and again admiring everything in the neighborhood and saying, you need to live so that one day you can be here. And I think there's going to be hope here. And I told my mom that, and she said something really terrible in response, which I won't share. But I remember thinking, well, I will show you that I will live here. And when I turned 22 years old, I moved to that neighborhood. And like it was like just a part of the healing process. And that's for me, like I always say, I'm living, walking proof that stories and musicals and poetry can help you heal.
Well, there's something really magical about what you're sharing because there's so many things in life we can't control. And so when you're like, well, if someone's like, well, why should I recover? What's going to be good for me? What's going to happen? We don't exactly know, but you're starting to trust your instincts. Like you were in that place in the city and you were in
Yeah,
that bookstore and it just started speaking to you. And
yeah,
you were like, this is for me, and
yeah,
you don't even have to justify it. You just
yeah.
knew.
Well, and at that point, I'd missed 2 years of school, and I'm like, oh, I'm tired of this, and really so much. We talked about like in the green room before everybody came that in the '90s I was on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and I told Oprah Winfrey in front of 16 million people. I recently looked up like what was the what was her average audience at that time. I told 16 million people that I never wanted to get better because I never thought that I could get rid of the voice. I never thought that I could turn that capital V voice to a lowercase v. And appearing on that show was really, really bad for me, Maria, because I became known as the boy in public with anorexia. And I really, really wanted that identity of the boy with anorexia. And I wanted to be the best boy with anorexia. And I remember when I was at that bookstore at Elna Bridge Books, I remember thinking for the first time, well, what if I become the person who's the best at recovering? And again, that's just like being part of my obsessive compulsive disorder. That's part of perfectionism. But like, I was like, what if I put as much energy into being known as a person who recovered as I am into being sick? So maybe that's not healthy, but it helped
I
me.
think it's super healthy. I think it's super healthy. I mean, because you have part of, they say an eating disorder is a drive for thinness. So you got to drive, and then you had an identity issue
Yeah,
possibly
yeah,
placed on you
yeah,
by being in a public situation with Oprah, where now
yeah,
you have an identity issue and a strong drive. So now you're saying you're finding a way to shift your drive to
yeah.
something really
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. And that, like with Louder Than Hunger, it's a story of survival. It's a story of how music and theater, I keep coming back to that, music and theater can help us heal. And something that really, really helped me in the '90s was the musical Rent. I would listen to Rent over and over and over again. And I fell in love with Idina Menzel's voice because of Rent. And I got to do an event with Idina Menzel a year and a half ago. And I got to tell Adina Menzel in front of 700 librarians that she helped save me. And I don't remember exactly what I said, but there's a photo of Adina Menzel and I hugging. And there's a video of Adina Menzel kissing me. And all I could think was, Maureen Johnson kissed me. And if only Jake Stacy could know this, like this happened. I'm like, but Jake Stacy knows because, I am Jake Stacy. And I am traveling right now, like 300 days a year, and I'm giving a lot of myself, but kids are giving me so much, and audiences are giving me so much light. But a way that I stay well is I start every day and I end every day by listening to a song called Another Day, which is my favorite song in Rent. And my advice for a lot of people is to listen to Adina Menzel's version, which is not called Another Day. It's called No Day But Today. And it's what always grounds me and keeps me present and in my body. Just be here in this moment and take everything in and be present for everyone. And Louder Than Hunger has already inspired it's just it turned to one yesterday. Louder Than Hunger has inspired three people that I know of to get tattoos. And two of those people have gotten a lowercase v voice tattooed on their wrist
Oh,
because they both of them were hospitalized for anorexia nervosa. And then the other one got the word wanderlust tattooed on their arm because Jake Stacy's favorite word is wanderlust. And they felt like John Schu was giving them permission to get a tattoo. And those people inspired me to get No Day But Today tattooed on my arm. And I love that it's always there as a reminder to be present. And there's a pen beneath it, which is the pen from the cover of Louder Than Hunger's cover. And then 2 weeks ago, I got the word capacious tattooed on my heart. I mean, tattooed, not on my heart, but on my arm. And I end every elementary school experience with kids by defining the word capacious. And this is what I say to them. I say capacious means that we're capable of containing much joy and much sorrow. And that's something that I come back to all the time. Our hearts can hold a lot of joy, but they can also hold a lot of sorrow. And what do we do when the sorrow is just too much? Yeah. So that's the end of that sentence.
and well, but can
Yeah.
you say something about that?
Yeah,
Because
well,
what do we do when our heart is holding so much
yeah, I mean,
sorrow?
for me, it's going to people like you, Maria, to help me, like to help me become unstuck. I haven't been in that situation in a very, very long time, but I was for most of my adolescence. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I feel like you're like a hero now because and especially because I think people they really, really need to find out, like, how do you go from being in so much pain and feeling so lost and, having a giant voice to going to like starting to believe in yourself again. It sounds like you don't have to fully believe in yourself yet, but you have to see like if you see a spark,
Yeah.
catch it, like go with it, maybe write it down, try to start try
Yeah.
to start building up some positives because they can actually turn into a great life. Like, I mean, would you say that you love your life?
Oh, I
It
do.
seems obvious
Oh, I
that
do.
you
That was
love
very,
your life
yeah,
now,
yeah,
and
yeah,
there could be another young person or older person that's been stuck in an
yeah,
eating disorder, and they don't. I think people believe like, oh, I can't even recover, or no one can. People even say dumb things like, oh, you can't recover, like no recovery is not possible, or things like that.
yeah.
And you're an
I always
example.
acknowledge though that I do have the lowercase v, and sometimes things will happen in my life. I mean, this day I'm 43 years old. Every so often I'll be like, oh gosh, why am I trying to control this? Why is this voice getting louder and louder? And I have to figure out what to do to bring it all the way back down so that I never go back down the path that caused me to spend
Yeah.
2 years hospitalized for anorexia.
And that's also like so normal. I do that too, right? Like we all like I have something happen that I'm stuck on and like beating myself up or worried about it or trying to figure it out. And so just knowing that like, that's okay.
Yeah,
And I was
yeah.
going to just add really
Oh,
quickly
please.
the connection piece there. For me, it's a dimmer switch. I have always referred to I can take a dimmer switch and dim it down, but sometimes it starts to creep back up there. So as soon as you started to talk about the lowercase and uppercase V, I was like, oh yeah, the dimmer switch that I talk about. So it's the
Yeah,
same thing where I can totally relate to that. Our words might be different the way that we describe it, but there's a
yeah,
connection there.
yeah. Of
It,
why am I spiraling? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
yeah,
cool to hear you talk about stories so much because, we all have narratives and stories about our own life. Even like
yeah.
someone today that feels stuck, they might ask themselves, what story am I telling myself about
Oh
myself?
yeah, and is it true? Yeah,
Right? Because like, and again, you don't have to have an eating disorder or any psychiatric, whatever. I'm a pretty good psychologist, I might have to tell myself a story like I'm being a victim, I'm being
Yeah.
entitled, whatever I'm being. I have to like tell myself, is that your story? Is that you? You know, okay, how can you shift? How can you modify it? Like we all have to do
Yeah.
our inner work, I guess you could
Well,
call
because I when I was writing Louder Than Hunger, I often wondered like, will Louder Than Hunger show up on a list where people say, is Jake Stacy a reliable narrator or is he an unreliable narrator? And I keep waiting for somebody to bring that up. Nobody has, because I would say Jake Stacy is a reliable narrator. I promise. He's not lying to you.
I would back that up from what I know that that
Yeah,
Jake
yeah,
Stacy is.
yeah. But
John, one
so,
of the questions that, oh, I'm sorry,
oh,
one of
God,
the
no, go ahead. No,
questions
you go
kind
ahead.
of
Sorry.
along this line that I was hoping to ask is just around telling ourselves that story first, because I think so often we need like an objective perspective of our own stories because we get wrapped up in things and we don't realize what's actually happening. And for me, one of the big milestones in my recovery journey was when my therapist had me write my story out and then read it back to myself. And that was when I started to gain self-compassion because I was like, wait, the
Yeah.
guy in the story, he's not that bad after all. And I could separate that voice from my own voice. And I was just curious, like kind of in all of your writing, do you
Mm.
find that to be important to be able to first tell yourself the story before you can tell anybody else?
Yeah, but I feel like I was telling myself the story for so long. Like after I got out, after like I was like on the path to recovery, I used to be very involved in two organizations called Snowflake and Snowball, which are like anti-alcohol, anti-drugs. And I would visit middle schools when I was in high school, like junior year, senior year of high school into college, where I would go and I would tell my story of like getting onto the path to recovery. I wasn't fully recovered yet. But then when I got to like in like maybe sophomore year of college, I said, I'm so tired of talking about that part of my life. I just want to move forward and never tell anybody again that I once struggled in this way. And so I think like I did it when I was like, 18, 19, 20 years old. I kept telling the story over and over again. And then it helped me go off on my path. And then I think once I was 40 years old, I was ready to tell the story for children to try to help them before it was too late. And I realized like one of the presentations that I do with adults could be called How to Look for the Jake Stacys of the World and How to Take Care of Their Tender Hearts. And I wrote Louder Than Hunger in order to go out and meet kids who are struggling, but meet kids who aren't struggling. Because I get so many letters that kids slip me that say, like, my sister has an eating disorder and I didn't quite understand it, but now I do. Or my friend is struggling. I didn't quite get it and I thought they were being selfish, but now I better understand it. So I think that in so many ways, Louder Than Hunger is helping kids who are struggling, but it's helping kids better understand and become more compassionate about people who are struggling. So I wrote Louder Than Hunger in order to look out for the Jake Stacys of the world. Yeah, and the Jasons of the world.
Yeah, and I love the word compassionate that both of you guys are talking about because if you hear your own story, I feel when we're not in a great place, we don't have a lot of compassion for ourselves. We're
Oh,
very hard on ourselves and but sometimes I think you guys are right. If you write it out, and I guess I want to give ideas to people like, what can you do today if you're
yeah,
feeling stuck? You could write out some of the things that you've been through, your reasons why. I
yeah,
feel like we're in a world that, tells us, well, that's not a good reason. That's not a good excuse, just take responsibility or something. But, I feel like trauma can really crush a person. It can not crush, but like really make you stuck for a while.
yeah.
And to start having compassion for that and start being kind to oneself, I think it can really help someone move forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to remind myself of that often. Be kind to yourself. Like Kelly, who's here, has seen me present a lot. We spend a lot of time together. I can get like, like 700 compliments, but there's just one little thing that's a little bit negative. I'll just go there over and over and over again. And I have to remind myself, no, don't do that to yourself.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So can
Hmm.
I would love to almost end our time by reading a poem that I wrote that
Please.
is not in Louder Than Hunger, but you have to give me permission to share.
All right, let me do that.
Sorry. See. Sorry. Now mine is freezing. Hopefully, oh, there we go.
There we
Oh,
go.
thank you. Yeah, it says now you're the host. I have all the control.
You're in control now. You're
All
riding this ship the rest of the way.
right. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, but I can't get to make it full screen. Sorry. Okay. So I always end my school visits with middle school and high school by saying this. I'm going to read this poem to you, and I invite you to read it with me by reading the words that are bolded, because poetry is always an invitation. And then I say that I'm reading this in honor of a 10th grader in Texas. So, Maria, will you be my bolded word reader tonight?
Yes,
All right,
please.
so here we go. Let me take a drink. Is there a date you think about
All
the time? This is such an honor to read this with you, my therapist from the 90s. Maybe it's someone's
birthday,
or an
anniversary,
or a.
turning point,
Perhaps it's before and after
moments,
moments that changed you.
forever,
Specific dates are on my mind and heart as I wrote and revised.
louder than hunger, November 24th, 1995.
Feels just like yesterday. The day I was admitted to Linden Oaks Hospital, admitted for anorexia nervosa, admitted because the capital V voice told me I was worthless.
January 16th, 1996.
The day a talk show TV crew set up lights, monitors, cameras. I remember how the butterflies felt as they bounced around inside my stomach. A very tall man put an earpiece in my right ear as a microphone was attached to my shirt. The camera crew asked me to walk up and down a long hallway. With cameras pointing at me, they said, "We're going to film some B-roll. Look to the right, look to the left." I felt strange. They led me to a small room. The person standing next to the large camera said something like, "Have you ever spoken to millions of people before?" I sat down. I heard Oprah Winfrey in my right ear. Yes, this Oprah Winfrey. And in this moment of like kind of a sad poem, I give away 10 copies of Louder Than Hunger in honor of Oprah. I told Oprah that I wasn't strong enough to get better, that I didn't want to get better. Getting better meant talking back to the capital V voice, something I didn't think I could ever do.
January 17th, 1996 to around August 28th, 1997.
I struggled and struggled and struggled until I started to do the work to turn the capital V in voice from a big V voice to a little v voice.
1999 to 2010.
We're getting almost to today. The years during which I earned 3 degrees in education, the years during which stories and libraries and musicals helped me find my place in this complicated world.
April 6th, 2017.
The day I discussed my love of libraries and story on CBS This Morning. The day Gayle King, Oprah Winfrey's best friend, said, "Bravo, Mr. Schu." The day I said to myself, maybe one day I'll write a story about the pain of my past. Insert,
Insert,
oh,
oh,
sorry, go
sorry.
ahead.
Insert the day you read.
Or read louder
Read.
than, oh, either louder than hunger. And this is what's most important to me. A day I hope inspires you to help Jake's story reach readers who need it. A story that might make someone feel less alone. A story that might help heal someone's heart. A story that might have helped or may help 13-year-old you. And then we always give that child in Texas a round of applause. And that poem was originally 2 times the length, but I brought it way down just to the heart of it. And I always end by talking about this with hopefully a guidance counselor or social worker who's in the audience. And I always bring them to the front and I do a read of them, of everything that I thought of them during the experience. And almost always I can say to them that I can tell that you're a safe person and that you're a warm person and that you're a loving person and that you help people who are stuck right there in the middle move to the right and move to the left and help them fill their hearts and their lives with more light and more love and more connection. And in that moment, I hope that all of the kids out there who are struggling feel safe enough to go to that person and tell them that they feel stuck and tell them that they need help. And because of Louder Than Hunger, off the top of my head, I can name more than 30 kids who are currently in treatment because of being with them and being honest with them and being vulnerable during that experience. But I can't just leave them and send them back to their classrooms like without some direction of now this is what you can do, this is what it can be next. So thank you to all the people out there who help kids like Jake Stacy and John Schu and Jason become unstuck.
It's
Yeah.
it's amazing. It's amazing. And watching who you are, well, I don't know. I mean, you were just as amazing and special when
No,
you
but
were
I was
stuck,
stuck.
or
No,
if
I
you
was
were,
very stuck. I was
but
very,
it,
yeah, yeah.
but if you're stuck or unstuck, a very beautiful, worthwhile
Oh, thank
person.
you.
And
Thank
now to see all these gifts that have been inside
you.
you waiting to change the world.
Oh, thank you. And you, thank you for helping me in the 90s. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that's an
Yeah, now we
honor.
all want to cry. So
Yeah.
Well,
what's next?
I don't want this conversation to
Oh,
end. I have just been
oh,
like
I
loving
really
all of
enjoyed you
this.
all so much. I really, really, it's been such an honor. And as I told, I don't think I can't remember what I said before we started and during, but last week, for the first time ever, I met with students below grade 6 to talk about Louder Than Hunger. It was a group of fifth graders in New Jersey who had read Louder Than Hunger, and I was invited to do an informal book club meeting with them. And I think it was like 12 fifth graders, and we all sat on the floor in a circle. And right away, it felt like a circle of trust. And I thought, I can be super vulnerable with these kids. I've seen these kids throughout the day. My first experience with them was with 400 people, and all of those kids stuck out to me during the experience. I saw all of them, mostly because they all started cheering when I mentioned Louder Than Hunger. But I didn't go into depth because I never do with the full grade 5. But anyway, I told them that next week I was going to be reunited with one of my psychologists from the 90s, and I started crying. And I apologized. And then I interrupted the next person. I said, can I just have the microphone again for one more moment? I need to tell you all, I feel like that was inappropriate for me to apologize for crying because it was a natural reaction and boys cry. Yeah. So I was really grateful for that. So thank you for being here with me today, Maria.
Yeah, and believe me, I'm crying too. And when we first saw each other last May, I mean, that was really emotional.
Well, very much because I hadn't seen you since like 1996.
I know. And
Yeah.
then, like I said,
So,
you were like, look where I am. Look,
oh,
this this is could be like a scary place,
oh,
except one
thank you.
thing is you're always
Yeah.
triumphing. Anything scary, like Oprah, then later you get Gayle King and you triumph it.
Yeah.
And I think you're just a beautiful example
Oh,
of a
you are.
person who follows his dreams and inspires other people to follow their dreams.
Thank you. Thank you. This was an honor. And thank you to everyone who joined us tonight and everyone who will watch later. It's been a big important part of this journey.
Thank
Very
you
well.
so
John
much,
and
John.
Maria, both thank you so much. I'm leaving here feeling inspired and empowered tonight. So this was an incredible conversation to listen to. And everyone else, thank you again for
Thank
joining
you.
us and for being a part of this conversation tonight. And we look forward to keeping these types of conversations going. So stay tuned, and I hope
Thank you.
everyone has a great rest of your evening.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Happy reading, as it
Thank
says
you.
on all my posters.